All right, so move on to the next segment. I'll be sharing my thoughts on the two fights that have officially been announced for the UFC Qatar card. Now, Dana White last week came out with the announcement that UFC will have a UFC Qatar card with two amazing fights already announced for the main event and the co-main event. One fight taking place at lightweight and one fight taking place at the welterweight division. So let's talk about the fight that was made at the lightweight division between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker. I love this matchup at the lightweight division. I think it's going to be a tremendous UFC main event for the UFC Qatar card. Dana White cooked up an amazing main event at lightweight between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker. And Dana White has claimed this fight between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker, this will be a #1 contenders fight for the lightweight title. So the winner of this fight will probably fight Ilia Topuria and Justin Gaethje next. It seems like that fight's going to happen in January for the lightweight title. But styles makes fights, guys. I think Arman Tsarukyan's relentless wrestling skills, grappling skills, and good striking skills mixed with his good MMA IQ, going up against Dan Hooker, who's a good striker and a mentally tough physical fighter in that octagon filled with grit and determination. I think both fighters are going to bring the best out of each other. There's going to be some explosive fireworks with the striking that could go on in the octagon for this main event fight between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker. Both will put on a show, knowing that the winner of the fight will be next in line for a lightweight title fight, probably fighting the winner of Ilia Topuria and Justin Gaethje next. So I think this is going to be one hell of a fight at lightweight, and I cannot wait to see it in the next upcoming weeks in the UFC. And both of these fighters have a lot to prove, actually, when you think about it. Because both have been on the sidelines all of 2025, unfortunately, with an injury. I mean, Arman Tsarukyan looks like he's been iced all year long by Dana White and the UFC executives after pulling out of the card that was supposed to take place earlier in January this year, or the first UFC pay-per-view that took place this year. Arman Tsarukyan suffered some injuries and had to pull out of the fight under 48 hours before the main event fight against Islam Makhachev. So Islam Makhachev had a last-minute replacement. And that was supposed to be a highly anticipated rematch because if you guys remember, Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsarukyan, they fought each other when these guys were climbing up the rankings at lightweight years ago before they became household names. And it was Islam Makhachev that got the better of Arman Tsarukyan the first time they fought. And it was a highly anticipated rematch. But Arman Tsarukyan pulled out of the fight, and Dana White didn't look too happy about it. And didn't have any plans for Arman Tsarukyan. Didn't even have plans for him to fight for the vacant title during the summer. That opportunity went to Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira instead. So it seems like Arman Tsarukyan has to win this fight in order to be in the good graces, in my opinion, of Dana White and the rest of the UFC executives. He better not pull out of this fight. But as I digress, he's got a lot to prove if he wants to be a lightweight champion and get a title shot. At some point in 2026, probably the midway point in 2026, maybe summertime, late summertime, early fall of next year, if he could win this fight against Dan Hooker. But then for Dan Hooker, unfortunately, he was supposed to have a big fight against Justin Gaethje in February at the lightweight division, but unfortunately had to pull out of the fight due to a hand injury. He's been sidelined ever since. So both of these fighters have a lot to prove. This is going to be an exciting fight for the main event of UFC Qatar between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker. But let's get into the co-main event, the welterweight fight that we have between Belal Muhammad and Ian Garry. That is an absolute banger waiting to happen. Now, again, absolute banger on the way between Belal Muhammad and Ian Garry for the co-main event at UFC Qatar. Both have a lot to prove at this loaded welterweight division. I think the welterweight division right now is arguably the most stacked division that the UFC has to offer right now. And Belal Muhammad is looking to bounce back after losing his welterweight title against JDM earlier on this year in a really good fight, but Belal Muhammad ended up losing the title. And meanwhile, for Ian Garry, he's looking to prove why he's championship material in this stacked, loaded welterweight division. It had an impressive victory against Carlos Pratis earlier this year, but styles makes fights, guys. I'm looking forward to this one. Belal Muhammad's offensive style mixed with his good wrestling skills and good MMA IQ, having the experience now under his belt being a former welterweight champion, against Ian Garry, who is a disciplined fighter, good striker, and has the abilities to make this fight interesting and has actually improved in his grappling skills over the years. over the last few times that I've seen him compete in the octagon. So I think this is going to be a really great fight at the welterweight division. You can't make up a better co-main event fight for UFC Qatar between Belal Muhammad and Ian Gary that we'll see in the next few weeks in the UFC. But guys, I'm looking forward to how the rest of the card is going to look at, because if you have a strong co-main event and main event for a non-UFC pay-per-view card, I'm looking forward to how strong the rest of the card is going to look. But those are my thoughts on the fights that have been announced for the UFC Qatar card.